Bitcoin is now at the resistance level of its falling wedge. As we can see here with this chart, you can see this falling wedge is currently in formation and we are heading towards that $7,000 resistance level. We're going to be talking about why Bitcoin may be breaking out uncontrollably as the Feds have just announced unlimited liquidity as a quantitative easing measure for the economy. We're also going to be looking at the hash rate of Bitcoin still seeing new lows, confirmed transactions per day also trending down, along with the crypto and fear index starting to rise just a little bit from 9 to 10. And most importantly, our headlines today, the Feds announcing unlimited liquidity, why this is going to allow Bitcoin to see a lot more confidence heading into 2020 and 2021. As you can see, investors are now looking at gold and crypto after this announcement being the corruption that's happening within the federal government in response to this global pandemic. And then, of course, we want to talk about how Bitcoin may be one of the only assets trading in the next few weeks if stock markets close, as that's now on the table for Congress to vote on, and why that will be a huge factor for Bitcoin to see uncontrollable breakout. Now that if we look at this chart, you can see we're currently over 70% up from our recent bottom of 3,900. So let's go ahead and dive right into this technical analysis. We'll take some questions from our live audience and then go into these headlines because I have a lot to talk about today. First and foremost, we want to look at this Bitcoin bullish falling wedge that's currently forming here. And I have been watching this level for the last 2 weeks. We drew out this falling wedge as soon as we dropped down at that $3,900 level. And when we broke above the 200-week moving average, which I'll actually draw a horizontal line at right now, is right around that 55.50 area, we then saw a breakout to the top of this falling wedge at 7,000. And now we see a very bullish candle taking us back to retest that $7,000 level. I'm going to show you guys some bearish and bullish scenarios that may play out in the next few days. Now, first and foremost, we want to look at this ascending triangle forming here on the daily chart. So we'll go ahead and draw that out. We've got this known resistance here, and we've already broken above this ascending triangle. If you guys are in our Discord group, we actually drew out this ascending triangle and we talked about us breaking out from that ascending triangle when we saw price action not only go towards that support, but it dodged the support level and went straight back up, which was a very bullish sign. And now, of course, we are way and above that ascending triangle, finding support alongside the previous resistance, which is obviously expected with a breakout. And now we just need to maintain levels above this ascending triangle in order for us to assume a test to 7,000. I'm going to talk about why that's extremely important. Let me go ahead and ensure this is drawn out properly for you guys so you guys can have a better view of what's happening on the micro time frames as soon as we switch over to that, because we are seeing major resistance at that $6,000 level. And of course, I do want to also draw out a bearish scenario where we've got a bear flag potentially forming here as well with this ascending resistance level. And you can see we've already seen a bounce on this bear flag, and we could potentially break back down below, seeing that $4,000 level again. And if we start to test the bottom of this falling wedge, that would be extremely detrimental for Bitcoin, in my opinion, being the fact that we're then going to go ahead and test that lower low of 39 to 3,800. And of course, if that doesn't hold, there is a high chance we could see more lower levels for Bitcoin. But I do not think that's going to happen just yet. And I do believe we are seeing a little bit more bullish pressure than bearish pressure right now. And the reason I say that is when we look at confirmation indicators like the weekly RSI, for example, you can see we've already went above 40 on that weekly RSI. And why I believe that's important is because now you can see we've previously bounced at 40, and that is a fundamental technical principle of a bullish breakout when we are above 40 coming from below. And of course, between 40, we have all the way up to 60 to then potentially see resistance. and this whole zone here is going to be a neutral zone. And not only are we bullish on the weekly RSI, but when we look at the daily RSI, you can see we are now above 40. Initially on Friday, it was all bearish, but of course we broke out, and you can see we finally went through that 40. Initially we saw resistance, and so the daily, the 4-hour, and the weekly all bullish. You can see the 4-hour a little bit ahead of the curve here, where we're seeing this level above 60, which of course is still very bullish. And now we can start to expect levels to go into the overbought region of the 70 plus RSI. And of course, in my opinion, that's what's going to allow us to see this retest of that $7,000 level, which now is really around that $6,800 to $6,900 level. And so in order for us to assume a bullish case from here, we want to see that $7,000 level break. And of course, that's going to take us up to the top of this bear flag, which will then take us to around that $7,400 level, in which we are going to have an ultimatum to see whether or not Bitcoin wants to stay bullish and break out of this bearish pattern, or if it starts to come down, now we may potentially see another lower low form. And of course, this bear flag may come into play, and that will obviously be determined once we start to retest this level here around that $6,600 level if we break below this falling wedge that's forming here on the weekly chart. And so it's very important for you guys to realize right now, most analysts don't really know what's happening right now with Bitcoin. And the truth of the matter is we are in a very neutral zone. Of course, we've finally decoupled from equity markets, which is extremely positive. We talked about that on Friday. And of course, as Bitcoin is being a hedge against traditional equity markets, as they start to continue to see newer lows, we are going to expect Bitcoin to see further breakouts if equity markets see strength, because just like we saw in 2008 with gold, initially gold went down with equity markets, but of course, once we found the close to bottom of equity markets, gold started to trend up. So in my opinion, we are closer to the bottom than the top when it comes to equity markets. And that's very positive, because right now, the majority of investors are in cash. And you have to understand, that's a very positive thing for Bitcoin, because that means investors are going to be determining what assets they want to invest in as we start to see more confidence come back into this market. If you guys watched Trump's announcement today on live TV, he talked about potentially opening things back up here in the next few weeks. And that is very positive news, as they're finding out that the virus does not have the mortality rate that we expected of above 1%. And that means it's almost going to be like a flu. Of course, it's very serious. It's very critical. It's an issue right now. But understand that we're starting to see a little bit more positive news. And you can see we're closing in on this bottom here. And this would be a very a bullish pattern for the S&P 500 index if we're able to find a bottom around that $2,100 area, because now we will potentially see this descending support level that could be extremely bullish for the equity markets, that would potentially lead into a V-shaped correction. And as I've talked about over the last few weeks, I'm expecting equity markets to recover extremely quick once we start to see more confidence in this market. And of course, with Bitcoin being that storage of value that we're seeing act as a storage of value now that we're decoupled from the S&P 500, I believe that will allow Bitcoin to see further highs and possibly an uncontrollable breakout if we're able to go ahead and see this pattern break above that $6,900 level right now into the top of this bearish flag. And then of course, we'll have to retest that $7,400 area. That might turn into the $7,500 to $7,800 area, just depending on when that happens. But understand that even if this bear flag does come into play, that would give those of us an opportunity who did not yet get to enter into Bitcoin at the lower level between 3,900 and 4,500 to have another chance to potentially get a lower entry on Bitcoin. Now, of course, if this was to play out, what I would expect is for us to start to test that level, finally break through. This bear flag may most likely come into play, knowing that there's extreme uncertainty in these markets. The equity markets might still see further downside. And if that does happen, we want to see a discounted Bitcoin so that investors can be confident to put their liquidity in Bitcoin once the traditional markets finally complete its bottom. And of course, if that does happen and we break down we are most likely not going to go straight down to the bottom of this falling wedge, but we'll find support along that 200-week moving average of around that 55.50 level. And so things right now are very undetermined when it comes to technicals, but I think what's more important to talk about is the fundamentals. So we want to look at hash rate. First and foremost, you can see hash rate seeing new lows right now. The miners are exiting the market, as you can see, because it is unprofitable for them, for the most part, to be mining Bitcoin at these price levels. And that being 50 days away from the upcoming Bitcoin halving is extremely worrisome to me in certain aspects. But at the end of the day, we have to realize price levels are extremely low right now. And when those start to increase, then we can expect to see miners come back into the market and dedicating their hash rate to the market. Now, what's interesting is that could also pressure Bitcoin to see higher prices, knowing that the supply is going to be cut and demand may increase, as we're going to talk about with these articles as we look at more fundamentals. So confirmed transactions per day also seeing lower numbers. Not a big deal for me, being the fact that we're in this global pandemic. People are still in high fear mode. You can see the fear and greed index, still extreme fear right now. And so I'm not worried about lower numbers right now. I'm just worried about where the future is going to head for Bitcoin. And it's really looking like we're going to see a lot more confidence come into this market, especially as we see this very important headline. I'm sure you guys have heard of this, but I want to go into a little bit more depth of what's actually happening here with this quantitative easing measure that's being implied by the Federal Reserve. You can say or see here, it says they are going to be applying aggressive action here with unlimited quantitative easing, which basically means unlimited liquidity into the market. And why that is a big deal is because over the long run, that's going to cause a lot of issues with hyperinflation of the US dollar currency. And right now you can see our US dollar is extremely strong, but that may not stay like that if we start to see more liquidity from the Federal Reserve come into markets and artificially pump up these markets, because all they're really doing is printing money and adding value to stocks, equities, real estate investment trusts. And that all is artificial because it's just being printed in. And so you can theoretically say, if the Feds can print money, why aren't they just printing money and buying Bitcoin, right? Well, that could also be a possibility. If Bitcoin starts to go up, if the Feds are just printing unlimited money, they might start printing money and then pouring it into Bitcoin. But guess what? Bitcoin doesn't have a centralized authority, and therefore that might actually be a positive thing for Bitcoin. Arsenal says it's not solid treatment. Why you're saying as if it's fear fact. Somebody's talking about a treatment. I haven't talked about a treatment, but if somebody in the chat talked about a treatment, then that's outside of my opinion. But anyways, understand that the Feds could even pump up Bitcoin if it really gets uncontrollable, because what we're seeing right now has never been seen before in history. The amount of liquidity that's being artificially injected into our markets is extremely worrisome to our federal currency. And so it's extremely worrisome for me, and I hope you guys are paying attention right now, because this could really lead to a lot of changes that we've never seen in the history of the United States and in the world, especially as we see artificially pumped markets. And so understand, things are getting interesting for investors. You can see with this article, very interesting, one of the most interesting articles I've seen today. It says, investors look to gold crypto after Fed goes on quantitative easing buying spree. You can see here the main points of this article. Says cryptocurrency investors are keen to see what happens should possible endless money printing boost spending. The price to pay is inflation in the long run, as I just talked about. It remains to be seen how government measures will affect inflation rates going forward, but it could make investors look towards alternative asset classes such as cryptocurrencies or gold, and that is what Bitcoin was built for from the start. And so I'd love to hear your guys' opinion watching this live. What do you guys think about this quantitative easing measure? Do you guys believe in this measure? Do you guys think that it's the right thing to do? Or do you think this is going to possibly lead to a collapse of our traditional system and a possibility for Bitcoin to really start to see confidence from everyday investors, knowing that whatever assets they're invested in, whatever bonds they're invested in, are artificially being pumped up, and our US dollar is going to be devalued? And so I think that's very important to keep in mind. And of course, that leads me to the next article here. Bitcoin may be one of the last assets still trading in the next few weeks. So to not only add fuel to the current fire with the global pandemic, with the Federal Reserve announcing quantitative easing measures, they're going to dump unlimited liquidity into markets. But even on top of that, there's a possibility that traditional markets could close, and that would only leave certain markets open. And of course, Bitcoin doesn't close as a market, and that would be huge for Bitcoin, because now not only can't investors take their liquidity out of traditional markets, but the only market they can trade is Bitcoin. And so what's interesting about this article is it says Bitcoin may be one of the last assets still trading in a few weeks. As much as it seems like a joke, it is a true statement that it could be a very possible scenario in the upcoming weeks. You can see here it says the New York Stock Exchange is planning to move to all electronic trading next week. Never before has there been a massive shutdown of stock exchanges globally. That would effectively leave only the cryptocurrency market standing, which never sleeps. We actually saw this happen in the Philippines recently. You can see here it says that in this article too. There was a 24% plunge in their markets when they started to shut down markets. And so if that happens to our economy right now, when the Dow is already thousands and thousands of points down, almost over 10,000 points down from its recent high last month, then that could be a huge, huge issue for traditional equity markets and a very big positive for Bitcoin. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that. Before I go into our audience questions, I want to look at our real-time stock indices futures for tomorrow, for those of you that are looking to see how markets might be tomorrow, because of course, when traditional markets are seeing strength, we're seeing strength with Bitcoin. Not that they're correlated, but at the end of the day, we're starting to see more and more impulsivity with Bitcoin than we are in traditional markets. And what I mean by that is when traditional markets are going up, we're seeing a lot more accelerated growth with Bitcoin. So you can see it looks like tomorrow is going to be an average day. The Dow up 487 points, not bad. If we look at what happened today, you can see even today we saw a negative market, the Dow down 3%, over 500 points. And so even if we're up tomorrow, it's not really affecting us much that we're continuing to see new lows. But understand, I am expecting equity markets to finally start bottoming out sometime soon. I think we're closer to the bottom than we are to the top at this point. And of course, that is determined by a lot of different aspects. A majority of that comes from understanding the fact that gold has already seen a huge sell-off, which means that most investors are in cash right now, waiting to see what asset class they want to go ahead and pour liquidity into. And I think that's the reason that Bitcoin may start to break out uncontrollably once we start to see this bull trend really come into play. But for now, there is a little bit more time. And once again, as we look into this chart, we're still seeing a very big bull and bear fight at this ascending triangle resistance level. And why I think that's important is you have to understand that that means it's a very significant level for Bitcoin. And if it starts to break above that $6,700 area, it's going to take us straight to the top of this falling wedge, which is a weekly macro pattern and has a lot of strength in the chart. And that could really start or even initiate that bull run that I'm talking about that's going to be uncontrollable. But I don't think it's going to happen just yet. I think there's going to be one more opportunity. I just have a good feeling about this. I've been in this market for so long that we're going to have one more opportunity to see lower price levels. And I think that's going to come after we break out of this macro falling wedge, but then put ourselves back into this major resistance area. And what would make sense to me is that we'll also be able to fill these unfilled gaps around that $7,000 to $8,000 level. And that could, of course, allow us to complete this bear flag, then seeing price action to the downside, retest that support. If that breaks, retest the ascending triangle. If that breaks, we'll most likely go down to that 200-week moving average. If that breaks, we'll go ahead and get that second opportunity. Now, this scenario would most likely only happen if we see continued sell-off with equity markets. And the reason I say that is because if equity markets continue to get discounted, then we want Bitcoin to go down to these levels again, because we want it to be an attractive investment for our investors when they want to decide where to put in their liquidity. And so I hope you guys enjoyed that rant. If you did, like the video, Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll take some audience questions before we wrap up this Monday live stream. We have a whole week ahead of us. I don't want to go too long today, but I do want to pull up this macro chart of Bitcoin here because I do have these key support levels drawn out. You can see not only do we have that structure, but we have these major levels of support playing part right now where we have that $6,600 level as a weekly support and resistance that initially we saw a very, very bearish wick at that brought us back down all the way to 57.50. And of course, now we're back up retesting that level, which is very close to the resistance for that falling wedge. And so either now, today, tomorrow, we're going to find out whether or not this is going to continue bullish or we're going to see a pullback from here to allow us to get lower price action. But understand things are neutral right now. Things are very undetermined. I can't tell you if we're going up or down right now. What I can tell you is in the long term, the macro, things look really good. In the micro, we're still in a bearish trend. So understand that shorts are in favor when it comes to shorter time frames. Of course, this major drop is not going to just go unheard of. There's going to be more sell-off at some point, but I think we're closer to the bottom than we are to the top. Matter of fact, I think we're very close to the bottom. That's why if you guys are part of our Discord, we posted that crypto swing trade with 4 entries, one at 6,200, one at 57.50, the next one at 52.50, and there's also one below that. And the reason I put those entries out there is that's where I'm personally adding capital and I'm buying the dips in order to maintain my long-term positions when we expect the uncontrollable breakout for Bitcoin amongst all of this market uncertainty in the world, especially as the Feds are announcing unlimited liquidity. I think it's such a sad thing, but the Feds have let us down in 2008. They've let us down in 2001, and I don't expect them to do anything different this time around. They just continue to make bad decisions, and of course, it's affecting our economy. It's affecting our companies. It's affecting our workers. A lot of people are getting laid off for these issues, and there's really nothing to solve it other than a decentralized system, and that's what Bitcoin brings to the plate, and that's why I believe so much in it. But more than that, there's just so many fundamentals that point towards Bitcoin being the asset class of choice when it comes to where to put your liquidity when you want to hedge against traditional markets and investments. And so I'd love to hear you guys' questions here in the audience, and then we will wrap up this live stream. Let me go ahead and pull up my live dashboard here so I can see some questions because my chat here is not working, and then we will go ahead and wrap up this live stream and talk about what we're going to be closing out with. Sir Bisto says, on monthly, 78% wick from the bottom of the sell-off is pretty impressive. Another week will tell. You know, you always got to have your limit orders set. I always say that. Always have your limit orders set. Catch these wicks because you really got to realize, I mean, who was able to get an entry below 4,000 are the ones that had buy limits set under 4,000, right? And so those get triggered out of nowhere. That's your blessing because at the end of the day, if you are willing to buy a whole Bitcoin or 5 Bitcoin or 20 Bitcoin at 4,000, then you just got your opportunity because we wicked down there. It was really, really, really scary when things were dropping. But of course, it was more exaggerated because of the derivative exchanges, just specifically BitMEX, just liquidating shorts like crazy and eventually shutting down their systems because we almost saw a $0 Bitcoin because there was so much sell-off going on. And that's always been an issue. We've talked about that in the past. If you guys haven't watched our video from last Monday, we talked about that liquidity issue and understand that having those buy limits set at those lower levels sometimes comes in handy. So Michael Naranjo says, how about ETH? Michael, good question. I would say with Ethereum, you just got to follow Bitcoin for the most part. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin dominance is proving to show Bitcoin is still boss and is continuing to see an uptrend. You can see we've got this major macro support line on the weekly chart, and we are breaking out bullish for Bitcoin dominance. And so in my opinion, when it comes to altcoins, I would stay as far away as them as possible for now, just because of the fact that Bitcoin is proving to be king as it always has been. And so hopefully that covers your question too, Malik. Had a long day today, so I don't want to go too long with you guys, but I wanted to make sure we went over the fact that Bitcoin at this point has a possibility to break out uncontrollably, especially when the Feds are announcing unlimited liquidity. Because guess what? If the retail investors all flock to Bitcoin and the Feds start to see it going up, they're not going to just allow Bitcoin to go unheard of on their books. They're going to want to start putting money into Bitcoin themselves. And if they've got unlimited liquidity and they can print money, they will literally print money and buy Bitcoin up, but that'll also raise the price. But that's all they can do if that's what they want, because Bitcoin is less than $1 trillion in market cap. So if they're just printing billions and billions and now trillions of dollars, then what's going to hurt them to put 5 billion into Bitcoin, right? And surely 5 billion into Bitcoin with us, I mean, understand, with the market cap being at 100+ billion right now, that doesn't mean that's how much liquidity is in the market. I think among exchanges, there's only around 300 million in liquidity, right? So the market cap doesn't determine liquidity. Liquidity is a whole different ballgame. 5 billion in the market would literally take Bitcoin to new highs. I mean, understand that that's possible. The Feds, if they're just printing money out, buying things up, and they collapse our system, and Bitcoin is all that's left as a proper storage of value and exchangeable asset. I mean, look at silver just tanking. Even precious metals are seeing sell off. And so, we're really, the point is we're in an unprecedented time in history right now, and we've never seen what we're seeing right now ever before. And so what could happen could be very extreme, and it could be something to jot down in the history books, right? When's the last time we've had an event that was worthy enough of the history books, right? And there always is one. It's a pattern. It's how life works. And so there's always that black swan, and the coronavirus may not be it, but it certainly could be the trigger. So Sarah's Business said, I bought 50 coins under 5K with all my stock profits made the past couple of years. Good choice. I'd hold on to that, brother. So Chris almost says, I think we will retest 7K this week, maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight. Just Free says, thanks, Naeem. We appreciate you. Thank you, guys. Let's see here. Any other questions before we wrap up this live stream? Nicholas says, I like the concept uncontrollable breakout. Well, we saw that in 2017, Nicholas. But man, if the Feds are just printing money out the way they are, it's very, very, very worrisome. And I hope you agree with me, Nicholas. I mean, think about value, right? Like, what gives something value? And in the past, our currency was backed by gold. They even 2 weeks ago told banks that they don't even have to have reserves anymore. And so how confident are you to walk into a bank and deposit money when they don't even need to have the money to even give you to withdraw money? I mean, there was a headline saying that the New York bank ran out of $100 bills when wealthy individuals came in flocking to get their cash out of the bank because they were scared of, a military order being put in place and, all chaos going on in New York. And New York is really getting hit hard right now with this virus. So, unlimited liquidity into markets, I mean, it's all artificial, and that, in my opinion, doesn't work. And so I think we've got a big issue coming up, and the coronavirus isn't the issue. I think it's what's going to reveal the big issue of what's really, really wrong with our system. And, it's interesting enough that Bitcoin on the white paper, it says it was made for a 2008 recession, right? I mean, it was created in 2008 for a reason. And on the white paper, it talks about the global recession, that being the reason it was created. And so, it recently won the top 100 innovative awards in history, being one of the most innovative things in the world. And so it hasn't proven us wrong yet, and I don't expect it to prove us wrong anytime soon. So it was built for the recession. Here comes the recession. Let's see what happens. So that's my opinion. But good statement there, Nicholas. Let's see here. Mark B says, aren't we minimum 12 months away from a vaccine? Absolutely. But it might not be the vaccine that's necessary here. Thank you, Osama. Keep up the great work. Sean Nevin says, I have a lot of family in New York. They're starting to try treatment soon. Yeah, we're starting to hear more and more positive news, but we'll see what happens. Radu says, your volume is really low. I do apologize. I might have to fix that. What you think, above or below 10K at BTC halving? Pierre, we'll probably be below 10K at the BTC halving. I mean, that's coming up in 50 days. I don't see us going that high anytime soon, but I would definitely say that we would be a lot higher than where we're at right now if we start to see equity markets bottom out. But we don't know the severity and how long equity markets are going to take to bottom out, because it's really all going to be dependent on the fundamentals right now, because that's what brought us down. It was the fundamentals of this virus. And so until we can really get some strong confidence in the market, then we're not going to see any sort of assets skyrocketing, right? But certainly when things do start to see confidence, we will see certain assets outperform others. And I think Bitcoin will be one of those, especially because it's already outperforming all of these assets, knowing that the S&P and Dow are seeing new lows every day while Bitcoin's up 75% from its recent low. And so SKC's this halving will be very different. Nicholas says, with the hash rate going down, the halving will be later, right? You got to understand, Nicholas, that there's really two major mining pools when it comes to Bitcoin. And so, when we see the hash rate dropping, it will certainly delay the halving, but it won't really delay the time frame too much. It might be off a couple days for the most part, but the predictions are pretty accurate when it says it's going to happen in May, and that's what we're going to expect. You just also have to realize that the hash rate has also been increasing very, very much so in recent weeks. And so as much as it's down right now, it's only as low as it was back in February of 2020. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's drastically lower, but it's definitely not going up right now. So we're seeing the miners that can't keep up and stay profitable get wiped out. It's the miner capitation right now, right? And so for the most part, those are the ones going off the grid. But the ones that have enough hash power, some of them have been selling coins to stay profitable, maybe taking loans out to stay profitable. But I think that's going to be a big pressure for Bitcoin to see a huge increase. What's interesting about you asking that question is if we go to Google Trends here, what we'll find is when we type in BTC halving, interestingly enough, that's what initiated the first bull run to 20,000. So when you look at BTC halving on Google, you can see here when we go to the past 5 years, that is initially what could have predicted the major breakout, because you can see in 2016, before the $20,000 Bitcoin, when Bitcoin was roughly around $1,000, it skyrocketed, and that's when we saw the halving of 2016. And then of course we saw the $20,000 Bitcoin around this time when it wasn't even getting any search. And so right now we're starting to see it trend back up. So if we were to assume history repeats itself, then that means that we're in the 2016 time frame, in which in several months, maybe 6 to 12 months, when after the halving occurs, eventually when the retail market catches up with the fundamentals, we see another huge breakout. And so it's interesting that we see this trend following itself again. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Nicholas, because it allows us to show this chart and for people to get a better understanding of why the halving is important, in my opinion. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. I do have a late night meeting with some of our analysts tonight. We've been all over the place today. The markets really have been volatile, very risky right now, being in this zone that we have that potential of breaking back down, but we also have that potential of breaking out. And so what we're waiting on right now is that $7,000 level for confirmation, but that might even be lower down to around 6,900 at this point, being that it's taking so long to get out of this zone. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Thank you guys so much. If you guys enjoyed this, like the video. Malik says, do you mind Bitcoin? No, I personally don't. And I just wouldn't want to get into that, especially because, it requires a lot to mine right now. You can't just buy an ant miner anymore and profitably mine. And so it's not necessarily the best thing if you're not really utilizing a large setup, in my opinion. And then cloud mining, I wouldn't even get into that. For the most part, those companies make more money off of the users than they do off of the mining. And so the users, they have to put up something before they even get into that. So, I'm not really big into mining at all, so I don't want to get into the topic that I'm not so informed about. Crypto says, when BTC reaches 50K, how much would that make one LTC? That's an interesting question. I don't think that could really be predicted. Marco says, your microphone on TradingView doesn't work. Okay, well, thank you. I'll definitely check on that. Your thoughts on XRP, Shah? I don't like XRP. Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO, he's already admitted to selling XRP on a monthly basis to fund corporate expenses, and I don't think that's a good idea. When you have investors putting money into your coin and then you're selling it off to fund your company, it's almost as if you're investing in the company and they're taking your money and then you're not getting anything in return but like an empty coin. It's like empty calories, right? Because they literally pull the value out of what you invest in. They pull the liquidity out. And so it doesn't make sense to me, And that's why it's one of the worst performing coins in the last 2 years. It's a good one to short. Sadral says, hi, Naeem. What will you say about stock to flow model? I think I'd have to do a whole video on the stock to flow model, but there's definitely some interesting correlations there. I just don't want to get too much into something when I want to wrap up this video. So tune in on Wednesday. Maybe I'll go over that. I'll write a note down here because I do have a stock to flow chart that we could go over. I just don't want to get too much into that right now. What's your view on staking alts? Is it profitable in the long run, Malik? I stay away from alts, Malik. I'm telling you, I've talked about this for 2 years now. Most of these altcoins will not be around 10 years from now. And that's the unfortunate truth. And we saw that prove itself over the last year when Bitcoin dominance soared back up to the 60% area, right? It went all the way from being around 30% to 60% in dominance. And so we really saw these altcoins suffer. And so I try to stay away from altcoins. When it comes to staking them, I know people that do that. There's different ways to do that. You can even stake Bitcoin by holding them in certain exchanges, right? Like Celsius, for example. But, I think it's almost like you might as well put your money in a Vanguard account and just stick it into a federal money market account and get your 2%, 2.9% interest, right? So it's really the same thing. So I don't really see much of a difference when it comes to that. Sean says Bitcoin is starting to drop. Well, I know it's not. It's still at 65.60. We're it's definitely below the ascending triangle right now. Most likely now finding resistance. But that's why we closed our shorts and longs. I closed my short, and then there was a long posted by one of our analysts. I got in. I took profits on both on first target, but I decided to just get out completely because it's really flirting with this level way too much. At first we saw a push down, but you can see, it's wanting to break down, but then it goes back up and then it breaks down. So it's literally flirting with this level. I think really the confirmation at this point is if we really break below that $6,400 level, then things could get a little bit worse. I would watch 6,300 to 6,400 at this moment. We'll update you guys on Discord. Why don't we do that? So I have this meeting coming up here at 12:30. What time is it? 12:10. So thank you guys for watching. Bitcoin's going down right now. Hopefully you guys are shorting. But we will be continuing our live stream on Wednesday, and I will see you guys on the Discord. Look forward to posting some more trades here soon. And other than that, thank you guys for tuning in. Jay Dabrowski, happy to see it's dropping. Eric, definitely do a video on SF2 ratio. Malik, does BTC alone exist without alts? Yeah, Bitcoin has been around before alts. And, when I first got into the market, it was only Bitcoin and Litecoin and Ethereum. And I think there was like Dogecoin. There were like a very, very few amount of coins, but Bitcoin could, definitely survive without any alts. It's not really the alts that do anything for Bitcoin. Bitcoin does a lot for the alts. That's why you look at Satoshi values, right? So, yeah. But thank you guys for tuning in. I want to go too long here. Say hi to India. What's up, India? All right, guys. Thank you so much. I want to get onto the charts now that we're seeing this drop because this just confirmed the bottom. I might get into a short here in just a sec. So, yep, I'm going to get on the charts. This is getting exciting. Thank you guys for tuning in. Take care.